The once impenetrable German Atlantic Wall lay shattered by the Allied forces storming the beaches of Normandy. As tens of thousands of Allied troops surged into France, a sense of inevitability hung in the air. The Wehrmacht faced the stark reality. Their grip on France was loosening, and the end seemed near. Yet in the shadow of impending defeat, Adolf Hitler refused to relinquish the territories he had so bloodily seized. Ignoring the counsel of his advisors, who urged a strategic withdrawal to fortify the homeland, Hitler commanded a daring counteroffensive to reclaim the Lorraine region in northeastern France. In September 1944, an epic confrontation was coming to Arracourt. Two seasoned commanders, veterans of the Great War and masters of armored warfare, were destined to collide. On one side was US Colonel Bruce Clarke, leading his vast 4th Armored Division. On the other was the relentless 5th Panzer Army, commanded by the unyielding General Hasso von Manteuffel. Despite his recognition of the futility of Hitler's grandiose ambitions, von Manteuffel was not a man to surrender to despair. He knew the dream of reclaiming France was a fleeting one. Yet he was determined to deliver a staggering blow to the overconfident Americans. He planned to unleash a brutal surprise that would rattle the foundations of their presumed victory. Hitler's gambit to recover lost ground in France teetered on the brink of recklessness. The Wehrmacht had already suffered staggering losses, over 300,000 troops, in the Falaise Pocket debacle in northern France just a month earlier. Moreover, their forces were reeling from the punishing blows dealt by the Soviet juggernaut in Operation Bagration on the Eastern Front. General George S. Patton's Third Army was cutting a swath through Lorraine on the Allied side, edging ever closer to the German frontier. Patton, known for his tenacity and aggressive tactics, was not one to ease up on the throttle. The Germans marshaled their newly formed Panzer brigades, the armored fist of the Reich, for a massive counteroffensive. They aimed to encircle and crush the advancing Allied forces in a bold pincer movement. Adolf Hitler appointed General Hasso von Manteuffel to spearhead the counteroffensive in Lorraine. Manteuffel, a cavalry officer seasoned by World War I. Manteuffel's military resume was nothing short of impressive. Stephen J. Zaloga, in his book Lorraine 1944, highlights Manteuffel's storied career. He had commanded an infantry battalion under the legendary Desert Fox. General Erwin Rommel, in the 7th Panzer Division during the 1940 France campaign, led a regiment in the bitter cold of Moscow in 1941, and commanded a brigade with the famed Arracourt in 1943. Manteuffel had earned Hitler's confidence for this critical mission. His battlefield prowess had been recognized with the prestigious Knight's Cross and an oak leaf, symbols of valor earned through 5 grueling years of armored warfare. However, the units Manteuffel would lead into battle were not the cream of the crop. As Zaloga points out, none were rated at the highest combat effectiveness level, Kampfwertwissenheit. These units were a patchwork of battle-hardened veterans, green underage cadets, and older conscripts, a makeshift force filling the gaps left by heavy casualties. Manteuffel's arsenal, though remarkable in numbers, was not ideal. He had less than 400 artillery pieces at his disposal, and his Panzer Grenadier divisions lacked armor. The real muscle lay in his Panzer brigades, equipped with about 100 of the latest tanks, including the fearsome Tigers and Panthers. In total, Manteuffel had a force of 300 tanks at his command. However, the crews were largely untested in combat, a critical factor in the looming clash. Leading the Allied charge in Lorraine was the legendary, albeit controversial, General George S. Patton, holder of the Distinguished Service Cross from World War I. Colonel Bruce Clarke, destined to play a crucial role in the American defense against Manteuffel in Lorraine, later offered a candid assessment of Patton's expertise. He said, quote, "Patton knew as little about tanks as anybody I ever knew." Compared to their German counterparts, Clarke's US forces were a well-oiled fighting machine. They were at peak combat readiness, brimming with motivation, well-equipped, and backed by robust artillery support. Despite fielding older models than the enemy's, the US Army's arsenal boasted over 800 functional tanks. This imposing array included M5A1 light tanks, the reliable M4AS, the potent M10S, and the swift M18 tank destroyers. This hardware, combined with the American fighting spirit, lay in wait for a monumental clash in the Lorraine region. On the fog-laden morning of September 18th, the German 111th Panzer Brigade launched a surprise armored assault on Luneville. The American forces, caught off guard, suffered tank losses in the initial skirmish. Just as the Germans were maneuvering to encircle the Americans from the northeast and southeast, timely reinforcements thundered in from the 4th and 6th Armored Divisions, bolstered by a company of tanks and tank destroyers. However, the German attack faltered and retreated the following day, leaving behind more than 24 destroyed Panzers and approximately 1,000 soldiers. The American side, too, counted their losses in the hundreds. US Colonel Clarke, recognizing the sudden shift from offensive to defensive operations, strategically retained his artillery near a fortified perimeter in Arracourt. In a cunning move, he messaged, quote, "Send quick forays out at night to hit the fortified enemy-held towns and return fast inside the perimeter." The German 5th Panzer Army, having failed in their objective to seize Luneville, refocused their efforts on Arracourt. On the morning of September 19th, Panzer units began to amass south and east of Clarke's position. They bided their time, waiting for additional units to join before launching their attack. The fate of Arracourt hung in the balance. Colonel Clarke seized the initiative, ordering an immediate assault on the outnumbered German forces. 2 platoons of tank destroyers and a company of Sherman tanks launched a bold charge towards the enemy panzers. Under the concealment of the dense fog, American forces deftly flanked the German positions, swiftly destroying 10 panzers. However, this aggressive maneuver was not without cost. The Americans sustained significant casualties, falling under the relentless assault of nearby Panther tanks. Fueled by desperation and strategic foresight, General Manteuffel orchestrated a last-ditch charge against the entrenched American forces in Arracourt. His objective was unambiguous and critical: to penetrate the stalwart defenses of General Clarke's position and incapacitate the distant artillery emplacements that were systematically pummeling his panzer divisions. But the US forces were not only remarkable in numbers and firepower, they were also creative and resourceful. During the offensive on September 20th, US pilot Major Charles Carpenter, famous for his unconventional use of a light aircraft in combat, burst into the battlefield to show why he was nicknamed Bazooka Charlie. He had gained a remarkable reputation for ingeniously modifying his L-4 Grasshopper observation plane, ingeniously equipping it with bazookas. This adaptation transformed the aircraft, originally designed for reconnaissance and artillery spotting, into a devastating low-flying tank destroyer. Utilizing this modified aerial arsenal, he aggressively engaged the enemy's armored might. Charlie masterfully maneuvered his plane in a series of calculated, low-altitude dives, unleashing a relentless barrage of bazooka rockets upon the unsuspecting German tank units below. In each pass, his precise strikes wreaked havoc, demonstrating both the ingenuity of his modifications and his own unyielding combat spirit. Charlie's bold actions led to the destruction of 6 tanks, among them a powerful Tiger I, solidifying his status as a World War II aerial legend. As the sun set on a day marked by intense armored warfare, the US 37th Tank Battalion emerged with a significant tally of destruction, having obliterated 16 enemy tanks across the scattered villages and the patchwork of fields. This feat of combat prowess significantly diminished the initial strength of the 111th and 113th German Panzer Brigades, reducing their impressive count of 180 tanks to a mere 60, a testament to the tenacity and skill of the American forces. Meanwhile, the less experienced German tank crews, despite their relative lack of battle-hardened expertise, managed to inflict substantial damage upon the US tanks, leveling the field with losses that mirrored their own. However, the impact of this loss was asymmetrically devastating for the panzer units. The superficial appearance of parity in strength belied a deeper strategic disparity. The German forces, already stretched thin in resources, lacked the capacity to replenish their diminished armored ranks. Still, Manteuffel would not yield before the overwhelming odds strangulated his position. During the following days, Manteuffel seized control of the Bezang forest area to advance through the village of Lezay and attack it from the north. With the support of a dozen tanks, the Panzer Grenadiers unleashed their might near the village of Ley, successfully decimating 4 US Stuart tanks in a brutal display of firepower. However, their triumph was short-lived, as Hellcats from the tank destroyer battalion swiftly entered the fray. These agile destroyers engaged in a fierce counterattack, obliterating 3 German panzers with devastating efficiency before tactically retreating from the battlefield. By noon on September 22nd, Amidst the smouldering remains and echoes of battle, German forces in Juvisy and Les momentarily ceased their advance, taking a much-needed respite. As the days wore on, the tide of battle gradually shifted. General Manteuffel's forces began to dwindle, their numbers and morale eroding under the constant pressure of combat. In stark contrast, the American forces, led by the resolute Colonel Clarke, found new strength and momentum. The skies above, once a murky canvas of war, cleared, heralding the arrival of P-47 Thunderbolts. These swift and lethal aircraft, responding to the call for air support, soared over the battlefield with a menacing presence. They unleashed a torrent of ordnance upon every German formation in sight, turning the region into a maelstrom of explosions and chaos. Each strike from these thundering warbirds further bolstered the American advance, slowly tipping the scales in their favor. By September 26th, the fiercely ravaged German forces focused their determined gaze on Château Salins, nearly overpowering the American troops before the intervention of air and artillery support compelled the Germans into a strategic withdrawal. In a final, desperate attempt to shatter the Allied defenses and retain their grip on Hill 265, the 5th Panzer Army launched a bold offensive against US forces on September 29th. However, the Germans faced a crushing defeat, suffering the loss of 36 tanks and approximately 700 soldiers in the fierce confrontation. The Battle of Arracourt culminated in a stalemate, carving its place in history as one of the fiercest armored engagements witnessed on the Western Front. To the chagrin of Adolf Hitler, the German offensive only managed a temporary halt of the American-led push into southeastern France. Once General George S. Patton's forces were replenished with fuel and supplies, they resumed their advance with unyielding determination, pushing deep into the heart of Germany. Had it not been for Dwight D. Eisenhower's recent agreement with the Soviet Union to halt at the outskirts of Berlin, Patton might very well have been the first to march into the German capital. Patton's penchant for offensive warfare was undeniable. This sentiment was echoed by General Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, Chief of Staff of the 5th Panzer Army, who observed, quote, "On September 21st, it looked as though the Americans were determined to force their way through to the Saar and the Rhine, and General Patton might well have done so if he had been given a free hand." At that time, the West Wall was still unmanned, and no effective defense could have been made there. Meanwhile, General Manteuffel's forces were left reeling, with barely 25 tanks operational. After 11 grueling days at Arracourt, Manteuffel's once mighty panzer formations and armored units had fallen victim to the relentless pounding of US artillery and tanks. The battered remnants of the German forces retreated from Lorraine towards the Siegfried Line, preparing to defend German soil. They would continue to resist the Allied advance until the Reich capitulated to the Western Front before the summer of 1945.